All right. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome this afternoon to our May event with the New Hampshire Network for Environment, Energy, and Climate. I am Reinmar Zeidler. I'm a member and co-manager of the New Hampshire Network. We've been doing these second Monday of the month events regularly since the beginning of the year. And we're coming up on our first full year anniversary in June. And we will have a big summit coming up in that month, but more on that later. Each of our monthly events looks in depth at a particular theme that's critical to the environment, energy, and climate nexus in the state of New Hampshire. But wait, I hear someone saying, you already did a presentation on community power back in January. And that is correct. We did. However, since then, we've been getting a number of requests for another run through on community power, both from folks who weren't with us in January and also from some who want a refresher. So here is your chance, both to hear from an outstanding set of experts in the matter, community power, and also to get answers to all those nagging questions you've been afraid to ask. Please drop your questions in the chat, and our trusted curators, Susan and Donna, will pick them up and pass them on to the respective recipients. Now, before I introduce today's moderator, the usual housekeeping items. First and foremost, let us all recall that this event takes place in Indakina, which is the word for New England in Abenaki. And it's the ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, the Pennacook and the Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude this land, these waterways, and the people who have stewarded Indakina throughout the generations. Secondly, this event is being recorded, and everybody who registered will receive a link to the recording when it's ready, which is usually a few days after the event. And you're welcome to share this link freely among friends, family, loved ones, passerbys. And as always, please, everybody remember to stay on mute the whole time to prevent strange echoes and other interferences. Thank you very much. And as I mentioned, please do drop your questions in the chat. We really consider the question and answer portion of these events to be supremely important, so don't hesitate. And now, with that, let me introduce tonight's moderator, my esteemed colleague, Joe Kwosnik. Joe has had a prominent career in the national grid, including as Vice President of Environment and Safety and as Head of Climate Change. More recently, he was board chairman of NHEC, the New Hampshire Electric Co-op, and he is a founder member of the New Hampshire Network, where he leads the working group on legislation. Joe, take it away.
Thanks, Reinmar. Thanks, everyone, for coming on tonight. This is a relatively short meeting. It's about an hour in length, and so we'll be as efficient with your time as possible. So, again, thanks for coming on tonight. Tonight, we have brought together a terrific speaker on community power and other well-known experts on this subject who will share their knowledge of how your community can take advantage of the community power law in the developing, implementing regulations. But before we introduce our speaker and panel, I wanted to frame the why of community power and its roots in the restructuring of the electric utility industry of New Hampshire. And let me start with, on January 1st, 1998, the electric utility restructuring law was effective. The law effectively deregulated the generation and sale of electric energy in New Hampshire and re-regulated the electric distribution companies in New Hampshire, including Public Service of New Hampshire, who's now doing business as Eversource, the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative, Grand State Electric, now doing business as Liberty Utilities, and Unitil Electric. I'll focus on only one aspect of the restructuring law, which dealt with the sale of electricity in New Hampshire. Prior to the new law, all the electric utilities were vertically integrated companies in that they provided and sold electric energy, and some, like PSNH, owned generating plants and operated the distribution facilities we call the poles and wires. After the law, the generators were sold to third-party operators, although with a caveat, PSNH retained their generator assets for another 20 years, resulting just in the last few years of the sale of the Bow Power Plant to a independent power producer. And the distribution companies continue to operate and maintain the poles and wires. Included in the poles and wires businesses, the distribution companies were required to provide electricity through the default service provisions. And the idea that this would be only for a couple of years, as the independent power marketing companies would win all the electric customers and the default service would go away. Unfortunately, there was not sufficient incentive for residential customers to go away. Restructuring worked by and large for industrial and commercial electric customers who were able to put power purchase agreements in place, but the majority of residential customers, in some cases more than 90% of them, have stayed on default service all these years. This has caused a great deal of angst by residential customers who want to influence the source of their electricity, control costs, and even develop their own homegrown community power sources. Thus, the creation of community power to potentially allow this local control. Tonight, you will hear about how community power can bring all of these desires to fruition. Let me now introduce our speaker and panelists. Our speaker tonight is Dory Drockman of the Monadnock Sustainability Hub. She's co-chair of the Hub and spent most of her career as an educator. She founded a school that organizes its curriculum around environmental education, and she was a classroom teacher for more than a decade. After she earned a master's from Antioch University, she worked as a teacher naturalist for the Harris Center for Conservation Education. She helped restart the Peterborough Energy Committee and became its chair. The committee is a founding member of the Hub. Welcome, Dory. Our other panelists are Lisa Sweet, who is the chair of the Member Operations and Engagement Committee of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire and a member of the Rye Energy Committee. Lisa taught middle school math and science in public, private, and international schools and worked as an educational coordinator and consultant supporting other teachers. Next is Sam Evans-Brown, who leads Clean Energy of New Hampshire in its efforts to create a cleaner, more affordable, and more resilient energy system in New Hampshire. Prior to joining Clean Energy New Hampshire in 2021, Sam was a podcast host and radio journalist for nearly 10 years, during which he wrote stories about New England energy issues and won several regional and national awards. Sam graduated from Bates College with a BA in politics and Spanish in 2009. I also understand he's going for his bachelor's degree in engineering. Is that right, Sam?
I at least able to fake having one.
Okay. And last, our last panelist, and certainly not the least, is Henry Herndon, who is the principal of Herndon Enterprises, LLC, and a consultant to the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. Throughout 2020 and 2021, Henry facilitated a collaboration of cities, towns, counties, and technical and legal advisors to establish and incorporate the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, which is a locally governed public power nonprofit. Tonight we will have Dory lead us through a 20-minute slide presentation on community power, after which she and our other panelists will field questions from our audience. We ask that if you have any questions, please put them into the Zoom chat, and we will do our best to relay the questions orally to our panel. So without further ado, Dory, it's all yours.
Great, thank you. I'm excited to be here and to talk with you all about community power. Before I get started with the slide presentation, I just wanted to give a few comments and to kind of put into context what I'm going to be talking about with my particular, or the Hub's particular slideshow. I was one of those people who said, you don't need me to do this tonight. You had a great presentation in January with some experts, and was then asked to, or then told that people were asking about how to actually get started with community power in their town. And what the Hub has been doing, one of our big contributions in our region has been introducing towns to community power. So that's the reason that I am here. There are some, wonderful experts here tonight that know much more about the details and the weeds, if you will, of community power than I do. But I also bring a more community focused lens that helps towns that don't know anything about community power to get acquainted with it. To that end, I want to also bring a caveat to the slideshow, which is that if you are one of the folks who do know a lot about community power, you will notice that the information in the slideshow is simplified. It doesn't have the nuance that many of us know and would say, oh, but that's not quite accurate because of X, Y, and Z and A, B, and C. And that is actually by design. So, because those of us who do know it well can forget how wonky this topic is, especially if you have no idea or very little idea of what it's about. So we are simplifying it so that the gist can be communicated in language that people will understand, and trusting that there will be plenty of time as the process unfolds for people to learn those nuances and details. Let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Great. So a couple other comments before I go through the slides. One is that this slideshow is one version of this slideshow, tonight's slideshow. It's really important to understand who your audience is. And so there have been times, and will continue to be times, where we have swapped out slightly different slides for some of the ones in here because of priorities and predilections of the particular group that we are going to be presenting to. And I can mention those as we go through it. One of the beauties of community power is that there are so many reasons to embrace it that you can really emphasize one part or another and allow community power to kind of seep into a town and not offend the, either the politics or the priorities of certain folks that might have certain issues with certain aspects of the program. And then the last thing I wanted to say is you'll notice on this first slide that we also have the logo for Southwest Region Planning Commission. For the last several months, we've been working with JB Mack on our community power program, and we've been very happy with that collaboration. And so I just wanted folks to know that I hope that JB is on this call tonight. I know he was planning on it. So he is also here, as well as other hub members. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Oops, sorry. So what is community power? In its most basic form, community power allows local governments to buy electricity in bulk for all of their residents and businesses from electric suppliers at wholesale rates. There are lots of other components to it, but its kernel is this. What changes? So there are a few things that change and a few things that don't change when you have a community power program. On the wholesale end, the purchasing, the procuring of electricity, that does change. Towns can now buy, if they are in a community power program, they can buy energy based on their own goals and priorities. In this case, this is to a town like Peterborough that really is embracing renewables. And so the graphic here is for renewables. We've got other graphics that also bring in more brown sources of energy, and we can be focusing on that. But the wholesale piece is one part of what changes with community power. Another part is the billing and the retail end of it. There are innovations that can be built into that billing and into the pricing of your electricity that allows for towns to build their own local renewables and to fund other priorities. What does not change is that the utilities still own and maintain the poles and wires. They will be the ones that you still call if your electricity goes out, and they will be the ones to fix it. So towns will not be saddled with that. Come on. Why is this not? There we go. Okay, so why choose community power? As I alluded to earlier, there are many reasons. One is that there is an opportunity here for towns to exert their local control over their electricity supply. And that is something that I know many towns really respond to, that they want to be able to choose how they get their electricity and who they buy it from. Another is that often it can result in lower pricing. It's not always, but often. And that is another reason to be going for community power, because we have such high electricity rates in New Hampshire that any opportunity to bring those costs down is going to be really appealing. For some towns, renewable energy and the opportunities to increase that even up to 100% are very appealing. And so that is another huge reason to be choosing community power. And then finally, there are what we're calling value added services. These are ways that you can be using community power to fund other priorities in your town. This is a slide that you can definitely customize to appeal to your audience. The renewable aspect is something that when I did the presentation in Peterborough, I really played up. And in other towns where they really aren't very interested or might even be suspect of renewable energy, really focusing on the local control and the pricing is where you would want to be putting your time and emphasis. So those value added services that were in that lower right quadrant, some examples of those are what you can purchase using a reserve fund. And a reserve fund is a fund that gets that you can be bringing money into through selling your electricity by adding in a fraction of a penny per kilowatt or per kilowatt hour to bring to your town something that you really would like to fund, but don't have the wherewithal as a small town to do that. And so if, for example, you were going to be able to get your electricity for 1 penny lower than your utility, you could add in 1/10 of a penny and then use that 1/10 of a penny to fund these priorities. You would still be saving the ratepayers in your town 0.9 pennies per kilowatt hour, but you would be able to still have a cushion, a nest egg, to be able to fund these other things. The most important of which might be an investment in local renewables, because that's going to be a really important piece, both of what we need to get our greenhouse gases under control, but also what will ultimately bring prices down much more than the system we have now. The more that we can be bringing them in locally, the lower the transmission costs will be, and we will be able to really then bring our prices down much more substantially. Other possible priorities are energy efficiency for low-income homes, or batteries for storm outages and other forms of resilience. Being able to switch on batteries instead of having to power up brown power plants that are both really horrible for greenhouse gas emissions, but also for cost, because powering up what are called peaker plants on just a few days a year when the demand is extremely high is when you have to have these plants turned on, and it's very expensive. Even though batteries are expensive, peaker plants are more expensive. Okay, so how would you initiate community power in your town? The first thing you would do is you would approach your select board and maybe do a presentation, something like this, and ask the select board to appoint a community power committee. So it has to start with the executive branch of your town or city appointing a committee. Most places in New Hampshire are towns, and the executive is the select board. So they would appoint a committee. That committee would develop a plan, and then that plan would be voted on by the legislative branch. In most parts of the state, in, I believe, all towns, maybe there might be a few towns that have a hybrid form of government, but most towns, it would be town meeting. So it would actually be your neighbors voting on this. After it gets voted on at town meeting, then the residents and businesses on the default plan will automatically be on the new community power program. They will be notified, and they will be given the opportunity to opt out of community power before the plan even starts. One of the things that is really important about the way this law was written is that you can have the option of having community power be opt-in or opt-out. With an opt-out plan, it is much more likely that it will be well subscribed, because people don't tend to opt. They tend to just do what is easiest. And by the way, this would not be part of my presentation, but I just wanted folks to understand that. So opting out is an important part of this program, and people have the opportunity to do that at the beginning and actually at any point during their enrollment. If you don't opt out, you will get the new rate and the energy package automatically on your electricity bill. The key action steps to launching a program are forming the committee, which I was just talking about. That committee will then need to do a lot of research. They will need to get data from the utility, and they'll need to write a community power plan. They will then need to do a lot of public outreach and education to let their neighbors know what community power is and what its advantages are. And then they will bring it to town meeting for approval. After it gets approved, then you would submit it to the PUC, or the Public Utilities Commission, who will either approve it or send it back for you to make some changes. And at that point, then you would be selecting your service partner or provider. You would then notify residents about their new electric plan and give them the opportunity to opt out. And then finally, you would launch your program. So there's several pieces on this timeline that need some explanation. One of them is the timing for selecting the service partner or provider. The timeline here is the absolute latest that you need to be choosing your partner or provider. Many towns will choose to make that decision right after forming their committee. They want to get some help, and the service partners in the state will all help committees to do all of the other pieces in this timeline. So you can actually be, jumping back. You can be making this decision way before this point, but at this point, you must make that decision. If you make your decision before this point, I believe with all of the, there are 3 organizations that you can choose from. All of them are allow you to sign up with them with no with no what's the word? You don't need to actually purchase electricity with them, even if you have initially signed up with them. You can then have them help you all through the process. And then after you've gone through the approval process for your plan, you will then have to choose and sign a contract with a partner that will actually go out and procure electricity for you. So that's one piece of the information here that needs to be explained. Another is that right now, there are no programs that have launched. And the reason is that even though we've got several plans that have been approved, the PUC has not made its rules yet. And since we don't have any rules, there's no way to know if the PUC would approve it. So or actually, if the plans have conformed to the rules of the PUC. So all of the plans that have been submitted so far have been rejected, not because the plans aren't well thought out and solid, but because the PUC has not created its rules yet. Okay. So the partners and providers that we have in the state are in 2 different categories. There's one that is a government nonprofit agency. It is a joint services agency is the type of nonprofit it is. And it is the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. They are using this particular model. The other model is our commercial energy brokers. The folks that are doing community power in that model are a couple of partnerships, Standard Power with Good Energy and Freedom Energy Logistics with Colonial Power. We, as the hub, do not give much information about them. We suggest that the towns do their due diligence and bring in those folks. There's some wonderful folks that are here tonight that will represent certainly the coalition. I don't know if there are any folks from the brokers that are here tonight, but if you bring them in and have them do a presentation, they'll answer your questions. They have been incredibly helpful, I know, for Peterborough. And we suggest that everybody does their due diligence to make the best choice for your own town. As I said earlier, towns can decide who they're going to work with either before or after their town plan has been approved. And then that is the end of the presentation that we do for the select boards, or sometimes for like the very first meeting of a community power committee. And so we let folks know that we are happy to help with forming that committee and helping you to educate your town about your plan and about community power. And I'm going to then, let's see, escape. So that is the presentation. Let's see. I want to show you the hub's website with one other resource for you. And that is here. Come on. Okay, here we go. Sorry about the lag in internet. We don't have great internet where I live in Peterborough. So we've got a page that's devoted to community power. It gives a lot of information and background. It also has a community power basics printable handout. So this is something that if you're interested in your town, you can make copies of and use it as an educational tool. You are also free to customize it for your town. If you do that and change any of it, we ask you to still give the hub and Southwest region credit and to use our logos and our names and our URL. But other than that, you are able to use it as you wish and to change it so that it works for the messaging in your town. So that is all that I wanted to share here. And I guess, do we want to just go directly into the panel, or do folks want to ask questions about the particular presentation that I gave?
Dory, I think we'll go right into the panel. If they have
Great.
specific questions for you, they can do it within that panel. So why
Okay.
don't we go there now? I notice we've got about 10 questions on the chat. So we've got some questions to go through. I just want to offer that I've been getting lots of questions from folks in the service area of the New Hampshire Electric Co-op. And we have no one on tonight. We didn't invite anyone from the co-op, but I did communicate with their vice president of power, vice president of power acquisition. His name is Brian Calney, and you folks may have heard him give a presentation in December on the electric utility industry in New Hampshire. He's told me that the co-op is more than happy to work with any community that comes to them within their service territory where they need customer or member information. They'll work with any of the energy committees and they'll go forward. I might also add that when you think about the co-op, they already do what I'll call as a giant community power methodology anyways. They are not like the other investor-owned utilities in the state where they actually go out and secure energy based on the qualities of the generation. A certain amount of their acquisitions are renewables. Some are more traditional brown or green energy, but they actually do it to try to get the best price and the best power mix for their members across their service territory. And I think just to add, the other IOUs are by statute. They go out every 6 months for half of their generation supply, and basically they take the lowest price, and it can be system power or something else. So that's one of the issues that I think community power really does address in giving local control to that. So why don't we move on to the panel now? So that panel will be Dory, it'll be Sam Evans Brown, it'll be Lisa Sweet, and Henry Herndon. So Susan or Donna, would you like to tell us what the questions are? Probably starting with Howard's question, which seems the first one in the queue. Susan, you're
Susan, can you go ahead?
You're on mute, please. There we go.
So Henry and Sam have already answered this, but I think it would be great for everyone to hear the answers. So Henry asked, Howard asked, the one question I'd like to have answered is a process question. To what extent are the various pieces of applying to get community power into a particular town susceptible to templates that could be used across all towns versus those pieces that are going to be unique to each town? In other words, how much of this could be cookie cutter and what pieces will require a lot of work that will be different in each town? And could we get those pieces identified in writing with schedules, deadlines for the process, culminating in town meeting? So that's been addressed on Zoom, but why don't I let Sam and then Henry say it out loud for everyone to hear?
I think Henry's probably the better one to answer this question with more detail, since he's developed the templates that he references in his answer. But I would just observe broadly that yes, there's quite a lot that can be sort of copy and pasted from one plan to another. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at the templates that CPCNH has put up on their website, but also there are several towns that have adopted community power aggregation plans already, and you can just read through and you can see that, you know, parts of them are pretty, you know, to call it boilerplate is perhaps dismissive, but I don't mean it to be. It really is just applicable to any New Hampshire town. And I would just say that you know, Dory mentioned and referenced a few of the innovative things that you can do as a community power aggregator. And so it's really those pieces that are more up to the desires of the town. I mean, you can have a town that simply says, we just want the cheapest electricity available, and we're not interested in any of this other stuff. And indeed, that's what their aggregation plan could say. But if they want to try to start to harness the benefits of community power to do other exciting and innovative things, that is sort of where bespoke plans that are more tailored to the town's desires come in. How'd I do, Henry?
Yeah, I think that's right on, Sam. And I'll just, I guess to add on to that, something that I'm not sure if I'm able to share my screen, but I could show a portion of the website that has those electric aggregation plans and templates sort of listed of the communities that have approved them. But I do just want to note, so Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, this is an organization that was formed by 14 municipalities in 13 municipalities in one county last October. And just recognizing that, you know, on this call right now, we've got Lisa Sweet, who's on the board of directors from Rye. We have Clifton Below from the city of Lebanon, chair of the board, but also Kate Messner, who's an alternate from the town of Hudson, and Steve Holmgren, who's in on the Durham Electric Aggregation Committee. So these are really the members that, or there's some of the members of the organization on this call right now, and just excited to see this network pulling together a group from the North Country to the Southwest to everywhere in between. And I think CPCNH is really interested in connecting with each of your communities individually and sort of figuring out where you are at in your town and how we could help educating your select board. I do have sharing available, so I'm just gonna reference for folks. If you do go to cpcnh.org, there's a lot of really good information here, but particularly if you go to the About Us page, and then key documents, you can find some of those existing plans. So I'll just show you very briefly. There's some good information about the board of directors, the mission and values. This is a map of those 19 cities and towns that are currently sharing resources through the coalition, and those templates that Howard is referencing. So really working across all these communities to not reinvent the wheel, but share information and share templates. And then if you go down to the key documents area, you can click into the various electric aggregation plans or community power plans that are posted there, just to get an idea. And then, you know, working with the coalition, obviously you get these in Word, in template form, and can make use of those resources. So I guess maybe I'll just pause there.
Dory?
Just one other part that I think is also important to customize, and that is the different options in your plan. Most towns have either 3 or 4 different options, and usually those would be the default plan, which would be the pricing would be at or below the utility, and the renewable mix would be somewhat higher, you know, a few percentages higher. Then then you can either go up to some towns just go directly from there to 100%. In Peterborough, we have like a 50% option and 100% option. And then we have an opt-down option where you are going to definitely be paying lower than the utility, but will have the exact same renewable energy mix that the utility has. And so those are places where towns, depending upon what their priorities are, can also customize. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Great. Lisa, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I do. So for CPCNH, I chair the Member Operations and Engagement Committee, and we have developed or are in the process of developing all kinds of resources for writing your energy aggregation plan. And we're kicking off the sort of implementation phase tomorrow at our meeting, but we have the energy aggregation plan. We have a template for that. So it's obviously customizable. And we have examples, and we share resources for community surveys, for PowerPoint presentations, flyers, you know, all kinds of resources that you can take to your own community and customize them. And I think the real work of the Energy Committee is in knowing what is it that your community wants and needs, and what's going to be best for your community, and educating them and bringing them along with community power. So we have resources to help with that. But that's like where, you know, the nitty gritty of the Energy Committee is to, you know, really kind of bring your community along.
And I just want to add, I meant to note that Joelle and Courtney from Enfield's also on the board of directors of Clean Energy.
Thank you. And Dory has some comments.
Yes, and I had one other thing I wanted to add. So Peterborough, as is its habit, is doing its own thing, going its own way, and have not, we're having our vote tomorrow on the plan, but we have not made a decision about, or even a preliminary decision about who we are going to be working with because of our own special circumstances. And because of that, we needed to write our plan by ourselves, and didn't have access to templates. That said, because there are several towns and cities that have already passed their plans, we've had access to them. And to a town and to an organization, when we have asked for help, everybody has helped us, including Clifton has been incredible in answering all our questions. And everybody that all the towns that we have asked for help from have been eager to do that. So even if you are in a situation where you can't make that decision until after the vote, you will still be supported.
Great. Sam, did you have another comment? No? Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question. That was a great response, everyone. That was fabulous. So Susan, can we read the second question?
Sure. Well, a couple people asking just about the PUC. So everything is stalled now. Are a few people kind of lining up outside the starting gate? What's the situation with the PUC having to deliberate?
Don't everyone jump in at once.
Maybe I'll take that one to start.
Great.
So things at the PUC right now, there's a great deal of uncertainty in that venue. It's a brand new slate of commissioners. It's also a relatively new arrangement. I mean, the reorganization of the PUC, where most of their analyst staff were sort of taken and housed within the DOE, is not even a year old. And if you consider the fact that the agency spent most of the summer just sort of moving the chairs in the offices and figuring out who used what bathroom in the buildings over at Fruit Street, it really is just a few months that they have been working in this arrangement. And so there's I would say, just again, broadly, a great deal of uncertainty as to how this new commission is going to operate. And we've seen a number of decisions that you know, would indicate that this commission is going to be quite a bit different than it was a year ago, or even much more to the point different than 2 years ago. So the point I would make, though, is that I think community power has the potential to sort of hit a sweet spot that a lot of the decisions we've seen from the commission in recent months have talked a lot about the private sector and markets and competition, and these are all words that community power can really easily adapt itself to making the argument for why it's necessary. And so perhaps there's less risk that there'd be a lot of monkeying around with the proposed community power rules.
Thanks, Sam. This also seems to be a means by which we can actually deliver the promises of restructuring, which we've been waiting so long for the residential customers of New Hampshire. Great. Susan, do we have a next question?
Yeah, well, we have lots of questions. So before I ask the next question, is it safe to say that we can type, send out the chat to everyone who's on this call, and maybe anything that didn't get answered, come up with an answer? So everyone will know that their question, we will have answers. And also there have been lots of really great links, so that way you'll have a copy of the links.
Right.
So question about green energy. What are the options for totally green, partially green? What role do RECs play in that? So that's a couple people's questions jammed together.
I could start it off and I'll pass it over to someone with more in-depth energy expertise. But for each community and each community power program, they will develop sort of their tiered rate system. They could offer one rate, or they could offer, as Dory was saying, several different rates. So one might meet the default utility energy mix, which would meet the RPS standard sort of as a basis. And then there might be one that's 100% green that you could opt up to, and anywhere in between. So each community power program will be able to choose what kinds of rates they're able to offer to their customers, and their customers or their residents will all they'll be automatically opted in. So they could automatically go into whatever the default rate is that your program chooses. And then each individual will be able to opt up or to opt out of the program altogether and go back to the utility or to some other competitive supplier on their own. For the rest of the question, I'd kick it over to Henry or Dory, perhaps.
I was responding to a question in the chat, so I'm wondering if the second half of the question could be repeated.
Lisa, what remains to be answered?
I guess how it has to do with RECs, perhaps.
So yes, if I'm understanding the question, there's sort of a couple of ways in which you can buy renewable energy. And one way is to purchase renewable energy certificates. And those are sort of traded in the marketplace because of policies that set goals for renewable energy. And those are associated with existing generation. And then another approach to buying renewable energy would be to sign contracts to develop new renewable energy projects or new renewable energy plus storage. So, if you really want to get serious about decarbonization, the latter is the way to go to develop new renewable energy generators. And that's really something that Community Power Coalition aims to do, is to create a pathway by which communities can sign contracts to develop new renewable energy resources and energy storage in New Hampshire and in the region, and sort of do that deeper level of clean energy procurement as opposed to simply purchasing renewable energy certificates.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question along those lines, Henry. What's the pathway for communities to actually develop their own in-town or in-community renewable energy resources? What's the pathway for that within Community Power?
So part of the Community Power Coalition approach, it's a portfolio risk management approach that's based on best practices from the electricity industry nationwide, but it's really demonstrated in Community Power in California, where they have these coalitions, these joint powers authorities, that rather than signing a single contract for a year worth of electricity or 3 years worth of electricity, and then coming back and reing up that contract when it expires, they actually actively manage a portfolio of various contracts with various suppliers or generators, and they actively manage that. And when you have an active portfolio risk management approach, you can enter into long-term contracts, long-term power purchase agreements for development of new renewable energy resources. So that is part of the approach that is being sort of transplanted to New Hampshire through the coalition. And yeah, I hope that answers the question. I also wonder if Clifton Below might want to chime in on this.
I would, if that's allowed, if that's okay.
Please go ahead, Cliff.
Thank you. The other aspect is that the RSA 53E, that the Community Power statute, enables municipalities to use existing statutory authorities, which is also part of what the coalition was formed to do, to issue tax-exempt revenue bond financing for electric generation projects specifically. And so municipalities can actually own and operate these, or they can contract with someone else to own and operate them, but they can use tax-exempt bond financing, which means the lowest interest rate that you can achieve. It's going to take a few years to get to the point where that would be an option. But what's happened in California is that 6 or 8 of the community power, joint power authorities, agencies, have developed investment grade rating, so they're able to borrow, and they're investing well in excess of $1 billion in new renewable generation. And so that's part of what is empowered by New Hampshire statute and what we want to try to achieve.
But you would expect in the community power the first couple of years that municipalities will contract with power marketers and other areas where they can ladder their, I'll call it ladder the contracts, so that they control their risk going forward with short-term and medium and long-term contracts for power.
That's part of portfolio management, and either right. You can do it directly, or you can contract with a vendor, a supplier who does that, and essentially, gives you a fixed price for a period of time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to jump in really quickly on the REX question, because I can't help myself. But there's actually a really interesting philosophical question that everyone should be asking themselves. It's embedded in this question, which is that if you were to, as part of community power aggregation plan, develop a local renewable asset of some sort, and then layer that into your portfolio management scheme, it's very likely that you could use that to lower the energy costs for your community. And part of the strategy for lowering that energy cost would actually be selling the RECs, right? And so there's this interesting question here, which is that if you are selling RECs and that is allowing you to develop local renewables, you then actually lose the sort of ability to claim your energy as renewable, but you have achieved the goal of building more renewable energy. And perhaps that's like more nuanced than people really want to engage in. But I pointed out mostly because I think the thing that's exciting about community power aggregation is that it can be a vehicle to advance the energy transition in ways that are sometimes more real than just purchasing renewable energy credits, right? So you might have lost the ability to claim that you're powered by renewable energy, but you got more renewable energy built. And so it's like, what is the ultimate goal here? I would argue the goal is to transition the system off of fossil fuels.
Thanks, Sam. That's exactly why I sold the RECs for my AKW solar system up in Franconia. So, got it. Susan, we have more questions we can answer? Ask?
Joe,
Sure.
does Howard Moffat have his hand up? Looks like it's been up for a little while.
I'm sorry, I missed. Howard? Sorry.
Thank you. And it's not so much a question as a comment, but it follows on what's been said already. I had an ulterior motive for asking that first question about templates and cookie cutters versus things that have to be done independently. And it partly has to do with what's happening at the PUC. It seems to me that as important it may be for many of us as individuals to get our own towns plugged into community power, I would suggest that if we can figure out a way to bring 30 or 40 towns along during the same year to get their applications in front of the PUC, that is going to help push the PUC in the direction that they need to go, namely to deal with this. So I'm hoping, frankly, that one of the things that comes out of this is a network of towns that will relate to each other and encourage each other and possibly work with each other to essentially get their applications going in tandem so that we get a whole bunch of towns ready to go before town meeting next March. That's all I'll say.
Thanks, Howard. And anything the network can do to help effectuate that, we're happy to do.
I will say CPCNH, we have 8 members who are poised to go. So we're very excited about that. And we have at least 3 more who are not locked into the town meeting schedule, who have council approvals, who may also be able to finalize their plans in the very near future. So we're very excited about that. And that's in CPCNH. And then there are other towns in New Hampshire as well, like Peterborough, Keene, who also have plans, ready to go. So we've got a beginning.
Absolutely. Susan, there was another question from Canterbury about the town itself is covered by 3 different utilities. And does that create a impediment for doing community power? Henry, you had a response to that. Could you repeat that on the air?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yes, Henry. Someone asked a question from Canterbury, which has 3 utilities that serve the town.
Mm-hmm.
And would that be an impediment towards enacting community power within a community like Canterbury? And I think you responded that it would not. Could you elaborate on that?
It adds a minor layer of complexity because you have to interface with each utility. You have to request data from each utility, but you can still more or less implement programs in the same way. It's just you have to get information from each of the 3 utilities as opposed to only one.
Okay, thank you. Susan, any more? Any more questions we have teed up here?
I think I've lost it, but someone was just asking very specifically, what are the services if you engage a broker, such as Community Choice Partners, what are you getting from them? Are they doing the generation, the wires, the insurance? What do they give you? What do they not give you?
It's a tricky question because I think each firm maybe has a slightly different set of services. So, I mean, in the example of the coalition, there are a couple of firms that are supporting startup, but the organization has a request for proposals out that we're anticipating that it's got almost 2 months left in its until the proposals are due, but anticipating a broad range of firms with different types of services, from procuring power to utility data management, customer service, perhaps organizational development, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a tricky question because each firm is a little different.
I can say that part of the reason that Peterborough has not made any decisions is that it's been very unclear to us what the actual services would be. We get different answers, and it can be a bit confusing for us.
I know, having been the chairman of the New Hampshire Electric Co-op and hearing all the complaints of the power marketing people within the co-op, trying to actually figure out how to ladder the various contracts over time and making sure that the power is renewable, the power is resilient, and that it's the lowest price. It's a really tricky business to begin, to say the least.
One item that I might touch on that I think it's sort of part of the process, and the how do you do this, is the coalition's joint powers agreement, just to make sure folks are familiar. So that's the contract among those 19 municipalities and the 18 municipalities, one county. And in order to join the coalition, the select board or the town council or the city council adopts that joint powers agreement, which has the bylaws for the organization and puts forward that up until 21 members, each member will appoint a director and an alternate to the board of directors. So right now, I guess there's 2 more seats, but the next 2 communities that adopt that joint powers agreement by their select board or their town council or city council will appoint somebody to the board of directors of the coalition. So that's how you would plug into the coalition.
Okay, great. Susan, any more?
Well, Donna, did you have some that you want to say? There were questions for community power people, for the electric co-op, rather. You know, how that differs, how, if they're subject to it, if they would get better rates. I don't know if you feel that you've covered that adequately, how it would work for the co-op. Or Donna, did you have questions that I failed to catch?
Susan, could you ask that question again about the co-op? I missed most of that. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, very specifically, can community power develop a lower cost option than default service with the co-op? And just other ways that the co-op might be a different example from what's been talked about tonight? Or if this is...
I answered that one in the chat, and I could share that answer as well. And I think I saw Cliff raise his hand. So Cliff, please provide backup. The co-op, because they are not regulated by the Public Utilities Commission in the same way, are able to engage in more innovative power purchasing practices, and so already do a similar type of portfolio management approach, the laddering of contracts that has been discussed by a couple of the folks at various different moments. So if you read a lot of the comments about community power, what you'll see is that what's expected is that this approach by community power aggregation is expected to yield a similar price to what the co-op is getting for their just the energy rate on the co-op bill. The difference would be that through community power, folks would be given more choices. You'd have more choices for different types of different types of mixes of where you're getting your power from, which historically the utilities have been a little reticent to provide to their customers.
And currently the 3 other investor-owned utilities go out every 6 months for their power procurement, and regardless of the make of the power, they basically choose the lowest price, which typically is similar to what they call the system power within New England. So the co-op, as Sam was saying, is much more discriminating. They actually ladder their power contracts from short-term to long-term, and they also meld in various aspects like more renewables or other aspects that assist the economy within New Hampshire. But again, it's a community power for about 80,000 members, unlike a town that might be 10 or 15,000 members or fewer. So it's similar, but you would have more local control if you have your own community power aggregation within your city and town. Although I might add that the New Hampshire Electric has a board of directors. They're all elected by the membership. So your ability to affect what happens within the co-op in terms of power acquisition depends on who you elect to the board. So, good. Thank you.
Joe,
Yes, go ahead, Don.
Clifton Belos had his hand up.
No,
You all set, Clifton?
No, I would just
Okay.
add to what they just said, that the co-op has averaged about 7% lower default service rates than the investor-owned utilities over time. And their portfolio management even is beyond simply laddering. It's the fact that they've developed some of their own significant solar projects at their own facilities. It's the fact that they and other ones like them through joint power agencies, municipalities, and co-ops directly contract as being off-takers of wind energy projects. So they can buy both the power and the renewable energy credits. And, you know, and that is the point about community power. They could do that as well as use those renewable energy credits to satisfy a higher renewable content option that they could offer to customers and actually lock in some long-term rates. So there's also a promise of a lot more potential for rate stability as well.
right. Also, we've talked about environmental aspects, but also there's some economic aspects of power procurement too. And I know the co-op actually buys some power from landfill projects, which have, you know, people have different views of what that's right, but also they've also bought some wood project outputs also primarily as an economic support for those communities within the co-op. So there's a lot of aspects to buying power that go just beyond just the price.
Joe, there are a couple of more questions. The quick ones, I believe.
Okay. We should do it quick because we're already 10 minutes over the hour. So go ahead.
All
Donna.
right. Steve asked if Community Power Coalition is contracting for power for all member communities. Will the communities then have the same pricing plans to customers?
Lisa, Henry?
So the process there is that over the next 7 weeks or so, the coalition will over the coming summer, the coalition will conduct its competitive solicitation process and bring on vendors. Each community, they have not, there's no commitment to any member to taking service through the coalition as of yet. When they do make that decision, they may have nuanced differences between their default energy supply product and the opt-ups and sort of the optionality. From the get-go, it'll probably be pretty similar across the board with minor differences. And then over time, there's no requirement that any member has the same default product or suite of products as any other member. No one member can impose a price or a renewable energy content percentage or anything else on one another member. So it's not necessarily going to be identical across the members. It may be similar at first. And then if there are differences among the members' goals over time, that could shift. And I'm also hoping maybe Lisa or Clifton might want to add any clarity to that.
I mean, I just think, you know, in the beginning, we're going to, you know, kind of keep it simple as we get launched and rolling, but each member will have its own community power program. So it's not just one big community power program, it's a lot of different ones. And so as you know, time goes on and people refine their programs more, they will be able to offer different products and different options for their people. And I'll throw it to Cliff as well.
Excuse me, that sounds about right. We'll probably have similar pricing for those that launch together in terms of the underlying cost, but this is really based on a model that's been used by many municipal electric utilities. Excuse me. Some 70 of them across the country do portfolio management for multiple members. And in doing so, they're able to customize the product to some extent, but they're taking advantage of the same kind of sources and options. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I would add that with the coalition, not only will you be pooling the electricity customers in your town, but we would be able to aggregate the other Eversource members into, a purchasing contract, or, whatever, like have all of the Eversource people instead of just the RIE people. We'll be able to aggregate more broadly with the coalition model.
Okay.
And one more quick detail here is with the reserve funds. So each member is going to have authority to say maybe they want to increase their electric rate marginally to accrue more into their reserve fund relative to another member. So that's another modest difference among the members that's possible.
Okay. Why don't we close up this session? We're starting to get well beyond our hour. I want to thank all Dory and our speakers and our panel. A great Q&A session. I hope this has been useful for those in the communities that are looking for guidance. And I must add that the impetus for this session was Howard Moffett from Canterbury. And hopefully, Howard, you've got some ideas in terms of how to move forward. Anyways.
Oh, listen, I just want to thank everybody. And I'm serious about trying to get a bunch of communities together on the same page and the same schedule. I'm going to be talking more with you, Joe,
sure,
and with Henry and Lisa at CPC and Sam at CNH and everybody about how to make this more than just one community at a time, but putting a whole bunch of communities together in the same batch and getting more bang for our buck in terms of pushing the PUC to do the right thing here.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Howard. And let's hope the PUC is going to head in the right direction. I'd like to turn this over back to Reinmar, who has a few parting comments before we close up shop for tonight. Reinmar?
Yes, well, I'd like to thank everybody, Dory in particular, also panel Henry, Lisa, Sam, and plus Cliff and Howard, who have made extremely valuable contributions. So it's great to have so much expertise all in one room, as it were. And I would just like to ask Susan to talk a little bit about what's coming up in our last 2 minutes tonight, about what's coming up for the New Hampshire Network.
Well, first of all, just a little congratulations that we launched 10 Towns Toolkit in February, and it had 10 towns participating. Well, now there are 26 towns, over 36 actions, way more than 1,000 citizens. And our next big event will be in June 18th, the summit, and you'll hear from them then. But in the meantime, tomorrow, whoops, go back just one, Reinmar. Tomorrow, is it tomorrow? Yes. Joe is doing a legislation work group. So the State House is not packed up for the year yet. There's still stuff to think about and talk about. But we're also hoping to maybe lay plans for next year. We already seem to be talking about that with Community Power. So come on to the legislation work group tomorrow at 7 p.m. If you don't know how to get there, go to newhampshirenetwork.org, look up events, and you'll see the link. And then plastics work group meets every 2 weeks. Next meeting is May 22nd, a Sunday at 6 p.m. And again, you can get the link at newhampshirenetwork.org. And I think there's one more link. Yep. Just reminding you, June 18th will be our summit. And we're working on that and we're pretty excited. We're going to try and get lots of people with important ideas that we all can use to help us make a more sustainable and green New Hampshire. And thank you, everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you, Susan. And thank you to everybody one more time. And we will look forward to seeing you all in June, hopefully, if not before.
Bye, guys.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for staying on.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good job.
Thank you. Thanks, Dory.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, honey.
So in case you didn't get a chance to see it, lots of thank yous. We're still recording.
Ah, yes.